Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive. We're going to explore a world that's, well, let's be honest, kind of hidden but super important in biotech, CMC. That's chemistry, manufacturing, and controls if you're not familiar. So you might be a founder, a researcher, or just someone who loves, the whole drug development story. But here's the thing. It's not just about the science, is it? Today we're going deep on how CMC can literally make or break you, especially if you're in a startup. Our guide for this, well, this adventure, I guess you could say, is this awesome article. It's called Navigating the Early Stages of Drug Development. It's a CMC regulatory compliance guide, but specifically for like small emerging biotech companies. So if that's you, listen up. We'll uncover what you absolutely heavy need to know about CMC, those things that they don't always tell you, especially in those early days when every single decision feels monumental. So are you ready? We'll discover how getting the CMC stuff right can actually get your therapy to market faster, and we'll tackle this idea of quality by design. Does that sound like a marketing gimmick to you, or is it actually a game changer? Well, let's find out. One thing this article doesn't mess around with is this idea that CMC, it's not just checking boxes for the FDA, it's essential, like from day one.
Yeah. It's interesting because for small biotechs in particular, the pressure is it's so much greater. You've got limited resources. You're racing against the clock. Competition is fierce. I mean, getting CMC right, it can literally determine if you make it or just disappear.
Okay, wow. That's a little intense, but I get it. The article, it dives right into phase 1 clinical trials, and I'm curious, it's not just about proving your therapy is safe and effective in humans at this point, right? There's a CMC side to it too.
Oh, absolutely. Phase 1, that's where you start building a rock solid CMC foundation. It's about showing that, you can produce a safe product, a high quality product reliably. Every time. Think about guidelines like ICH-Q10. It's not just a bunch of boring rules. It's a framework for a really robust pharmaceutical quality system. And that's, it all ties back into managing risks effectively, which is huge at this stage.
Risk management. Okay, I mean, that sounds a bit, I don't know, dry maybe, but I know it's important. What kind of risks are we even talking about here? What could actually trip a company up, even if their science is, totally solid?
Yeah, let's get specific. Imagine you're developing a biologic, something cutting edge, right? Like a protein-based therapy. One risk is immunogenicity. That's where the patient's body actually rejects the therapy. Another risk is impurities, sneaking into your process during manufacturing. If you're not super careful, like meticulously controlling your cell cultures, you could end up with a product that's, well, inconsistent, maybe even, dangerous.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's making me a little nervous. I'm guessing these issues, they're not easy to fix once you find them, right?
Exactly. Imagine getting really far along in development, and then you discover, oh, there's a contamination issue with your cell bank. You might have to start the entire process over. That costs time and money that, honestly, you probably don't have.
Yeah, so this isn't just about, like, following the rules. It's about protecting yourself, protecting your company, your future. The article makes it really clear. The sponsor, and that's you, listener, if you're the one leading the charge here, you are ultimately responsible. You're responsible for getting this right.
And that responsibility, it becomes even more critical when you think about scaling up, moving from those early trials, phase 2 to phase 3. It's not just about making more of your product. It's about making sure the quality is there every single step of the way. And that's where, quality by design comes in.
Okay, I have to admit, when I first heard quality by design, I thought, oh, come on, that's just a buzzword. But the way this article talks about it, it sounds like, I don't know, like a fundamental shift in how we think about CMC. Can you break it down for us? Like, beyond the jargon, what does it really mean?
Yeah, the term itself, it can be a little misleading. I'll admit that. It's not about designing a quality product. It's about designing a process that guarantees that quality right from the start.
Oh, I see. So instead of hoping for the best and then fixing problems later, you're building quality into the system itself. But how does that actually work, like, in the real world? Give us an example.
Okay. Let's say you're developing a cell therapy. That's an incredibly complex process, right? Tons of variables. With QBD, you're not just blindly following a recipe. You're trying to deeply understand how each step, each material, even the environment, how those things affect the final product.
Oh, so it's like you're mapping out every possible thing that could go wrong and then figuring out how to prevent it, like, before it even becomes a problem. That sounds intense, but I'm starting to see how it could be a total game changer, especially as you start to scale up production.
Exactly. And, it all ties back to what we were talking about before, risk management. By understanding your process so deeply, you can spot those potential risks early on and deal with them proactively, instead of, scrambling to react later when it might be too late.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like QBD is about shifting from being reactive to being proactive. But wouldn't that require a ton of work up front? Especially for a small company, resources are limited.
It does require a different way of thinking, for sure. And yes, some upfront investment. But, think about what happens if you don't do it. What if you have a major quality issue pop up really late in development? Your whole project could be delayed, by months, maybe even years. That's a cost a lot of small companies just can't afford.
You're right. The cost of not doing it right could be way bigger in the long run. And I'm guessing that's why the article emphasizes, talking to the regulators early and often. I think a lot of small companies, they see the FDA as this intimidating hurdle to overcome. But it sounds like you're saying they should be viewed more as partners.
Exactly. Think of it this way.
Mm-hmm.
The FDA, their goal is to make sure safe and effective therapies get to patients. And they have a ton of experience, so much expertise that can be really helpful to you, especially in those early stages when you're still figuring out your CMC strategy.
So instead of being afraid of the FDA, you should be excited to tap into their knowledge, their guidance. It's about building that relationship early on rather than waiting until the very end.
Absolutely. And that open communication, it pays off big time, later down the road, especially when you hit those inevitable challenges. Because let's face it, drug development, it's rarely smooth sailing.
Yeah, there are always going to be bumps in the road.
And that's where having a good relationship with the FDA can really make a difference. They can help you navigate those challenges, make sure you understand what they expect, maybe even offer solutions you hadn't thought of.
Right. So it's about having a conversation, not just, digging your heels in.
Right.
Okay, but what if you make a mistake? What if there's a quality issue, even with all the planning in the world?
Well, then transparency is key. Don't try to hide problems. That only makes things worse. Let the FDA know right away. Explain how you're looking into the issue and what steps you're taking to fix it. Remember, they're not out to punish you. They want to make sure patients are safe.
It's about taking responsibility for your mistakes and showing that you're learning from them. But this brings up something else that's probably on a lot of people's minds. How do you balance all of this with the need to move quickly? Especially for small companies, time is literally money.
That's a really good point. And that's where that foundation you built early on with QBD, it really starts to pay off. Having solid systems in place, good documentation, it lets you deal with problems efficiently without having to start from scratch every time.
Yeah, it's like having a really well-organized toolbox. When you need a specific tool, you know exactly where it is. Okay, so we've talked about building a solid CMC strategy. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about setting yourself up for success, both with the regulators and, eventually in the marketplace.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to approach CMC strategically right from the beginning. It's not just some technical exercise. It's a business imperative.
So, to everyone listening, whether you're a seasoned biotech entrepreneur or just starting out, remember this, CMC. It's not an afterthought. It's a crucial part of your success story. And by really embracing quality by design and being proactive with those regulatory authorities, you can turn those what seem like hurdles, those regulatory hurdles, into stepping stones. Stepping stones to achieving your ultimate goal, which is getting your innovation into the hands of patients.
And speaking of those regulatory hurdles, the journey, it doesn't end with phase 1. As your therapy moves through those later stages of development, the CMC challenges, well, they get even more complex. That's actually where we're going to pick up in part 2 of this deep dive.
Right. We'll be back soon to explore how CMC plays a critical role in scaling up production and getting ready for commercialization. And ultimately, making sure your innovation doesn't just reach the market, but thrives there. So stay tuned, because the most exciting part of the journey is just beginning. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into CMC. Last time, we kind of set the stage, right? We talked about why CMC is so important right from the beginning and how planning ahead can really save you some serious headaches later on. But the journey definitely doesn't end there. Our guide, that Navigating the Early Stages article, it takes us even further. Today, we're going to tackle that tricky transition from early trials to those later stages. We're talking scaling up production, getting closer to that marketing application. The pressure's definitely on.
This is really where that early commitment to quality by design starts to pay off.
Yeah.
Or maybe, as the article puts it, where the cracks start to show. If you've been, well, let's say relying on quality by chance.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. What's the difference between those two approaches at this stage? Is it really that noticeable?
Imagine, you're scaling up production for your cell therapy. You're going from a small lab to a full-blown manufacturing facility. With QBD, you've already, mapped out those critical process parameters. You understand how they affect quality, and you've got those robust controls in place.
So you're not scrambling to figure things out on the fly as you get bigger. You've got this, blueprint for staying consistent. But what if something unexpected pops up? Like, say, you have to get a key ingredient from a new supplier or a piece of equipment breaks down.
That's where, that deep process understanding comes in. With QBD, you're not just blindly following a recipe. You understand the why behind every step. So if you need to change something, you can figure out what the impact will be and make, smart decisions without messing up the quality.
I see. So it's about being adaptable, not rigid. But wouldn't that mean, tons of documentation? I'm picturing mountains of paperwork.
Documentation is key, yeah, but it's like your insurance policy. Those clear, detailed records, they show the regulators that you've got a handle on your process, that you're not cutting corners. And it's not just about satisfying the FDA, it protects you too. What if a batch of your product, shows some unexpected variability? With good documentation, you can trace back, find the root cause, and stop it from happening again.
Makes sense. It's not just about checking boxes, it's about doing things the right way, period. But this brings up another point from the article, engaging with those regulatory authorities. I think a lot of small companies, they just feel intimidated by the FDA, especially as things get more complex.
I understand that. I really do. But remember, the FDA, they can be your partner, not your enemy. As you move into these later stages, that relationship becomes even more valuable. Think of it as a constant conversation, not just a one-time submission.
So instead of waiting until the very end to show them everything, you're keeping them in the loop.
Exactly. Share your plans early on, talk about potential problems, get their feedback. This proactive approach, it can save you a lot of time, money, and surprises later. And it builds trust, which is, incredibly valuable.
Okay, but let's be real. Not every company has a perfect relationship with the FDA. What if you disagree on something? Or what if they raise concerns about your approach?
Well, disagreements and questions, they're normal. The key is to address them openly and, constructively. Remember, the FDA's learning too, especially with these, really innovative therapies that push the boundaries. Be prepared to back up your decisions, show them the data, and be willing to compromise sometimes.
So it's about having a dialogue, not just digging in your heels. But what if you mess up? What if there's a quality issue, even with all the planning?
Well, you've got to be transparent. Don't try to hide it. That just makes things worse. Tell the FDA right away. Explain what happened, how you're figuring out what went wrong, and what you're doing to fix it. Remember, they're not out to get you. They want to make sure patients are safe.
It's about owning your mistakes and showing that you're learning from them. But this brings up another question. How do you balance all of this with the need for speed? Especially for smaller companies, time is money.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. And that's where, that early foundation you built with QBD really pays off. Having those robust systems, good documentation, it helps you deal with issues efficiently.
Yeah.
Without having to reinvent the wheel every time.
It's like having that well-organized toolbox. You need a tool, you know right where to find it. But let's be realistic, even with the best tools, scaling up production is a huge undertaking. What are some of the biggest challenges companies face at this stage, from a CMC perspective?
One big one is, keeping that consistency we talked about, but on a much larger scale. Think about moving your process from a small lab to a big manufacturing facility. New equipment, new people, maybe even a different location. All of that can introduce variability.
So it's not just about making more of the same thing, it's about making sure the quality stays the same no matter how much you're making. And I guess that's where validation comes in, right? Proving that your process is reliable and you can do it over and over.
Exactly. Validation means rigorous testing and documentation. You have to show that your process consistently produces a product that meets those, predefined specifications. And the FDA, they're going to look at this very carefully, especially as you're getting ready for that marketing application.
Okay, starting to feel the pressure here, but I can see how everything we've talked about, the QBD, working with the regulators early on, all that documentation, it all helps you get ready for that moment when you finally submit your application.
Absolutely. Think of it as building a solid case for your product to be approved. You're not just handing over data, you're showing them that you deeply understand your process, that you're committed to quality, and that you've been transparent and collaborative with the FDA.
It's about building trust, not just meeting the bare minimum. But I'm curious, what happens after you submit your application? Is that the end of the CMC journey?
Oh, not at all. The FDA, They'll review everything you sent, and they'll probably ask for more information or clarification. You might need to run more tests or provide more documents. This is where that strong relationship with the FDA really comes in handy. You need to be able to respond quickly and effectively.
So even after you cross the finish line, the race isn't over. There's still work to do. Well, today we covered a lot. We talked about scaling up, staying consistent, working with the FDA, and building that rock-solid case for approval. But the CMC story, it doesn't end there. In part 3, we're going to dive into what happens after your therapy is approved and how CMC plays a key role in getting your product out into the market and making sure it succeeds in the long run. So stay tuned, because the most exciting part of the journey is just about to begin. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. We've come a long way, haven't we? From those early CMC basics to submitting your marketing application. It's been quite a ride. But, our trusty guide, that Navigating the Early Stages article, it reminds us that getting approved, well, it's only half the battle. The real goal is to get your innovation out there, into the hands of patients. And that means, launching into the market, not just getting the FDA's blessing.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of companies, they kind of trip up. They've put everything into clinical trials, celebrated that FDA approval, and then, bam, reality hits. The market, it's a whole different ballgame.
Okay, I'm listening. What are some of the CMC traps that companies fall into during this transition? From approval to launch, I mean. You'd think you'd be home free at that point.
You'd think so, right. But imagine this. You've scaled up production based on your initial estimates, right? And then all of a sudden, the demand is way higher than you expected. Now you're scrambling to ramp up manufacturing, and that could mean compromising that careful quality control you've worked so hard to establish.
Ouch. Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. It seems like being flexible is key, even at this late stage. But how can you predict market demand accurately? Do you need a crystal ball or something?
Well, a crystal ball would be handy. But realistically, it's about having systems in place that can adapt, when things change. Remember that whole deep process understanding thing we talked about? That's what allows you to make smart decisions about scaling up or down, finding new materials, maybe even tweaking your manufacturing process, and all while keeping that consistency we talked about, which is so important.
Right, so it's about being proactive, not reactive. But what about those unexpected problems? Like, what if a batch of your product fails a quality check, or you suddenly can't get a critical ingredient? How do you handle that in the middle of a launch?
You have to be transparent and act fast. Remember, you're not just dealing with regulators anymore. You've got patients, doctors, everyone relying on you. Communicate clearly about any problems and have a solid plan for, investigating and fixing things. It's all about maintaining that trust, which is, absolutely crucial in the market.
Makes sense. You can't just ignore problems, especially when people's health is on the line. This whole commercialization thing, it adds a layer of complexity that I think a lot of scientists and researchers just don't see coming.
You're right, it does. CMC, during commercialization, it's not just about checking boxes for the FDA. It's about supply chains, predicting demand, keeping costs down, and all while sticking to those strict quality standards.
It sounds like you need a whole different set of skills at this point. So what advice would you give to a small biotech company getting ready to launch their first product? How do they navigate this new world of CMC challenges?
Well, the first thing is, don't underestimate how important it is to build a strong CMC team early on. You need people with expertise in manufacturing, quality, supply chains, regulatory affairs, the whole 9 yards. And this team, they need to be working closely with your clinical and commercial teams. Everyone needs to be on the same page.
Right, so it's about breaking down those silos, getting everyone rowing in the same direction. But what about those smaller companies that maybe don't have the resources for a big CMC team? What should they do?
Look for partners, consultants, maybe even a contract manufacturing organization. They can give you the expertise you need. Don't try to do everything yourself, especially at the beginning. Focus on what you're good at and find partners who can fill those gaps.
That's a great point. It's about playing to your strengths and building a support network. Okay, let's step back for a second and think big picture. Our article talks about making sure biotech innovation doesn't just reach the market, but that it thrives there. What does that mean to you in terms of CMC?
To me, it means building a CMC strategy that's sustainable.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting approved and launching. It's about constantly looking for ways to improve, making things more efficient, cutting costs, and always improving quality.
So it's about continuous improvement, not just, sitting back and relaxing once you've got that first product out there. But isn't that a lot to ask, especially in such a fast-moving competitive industry?
It is, yeah. But it's crucial if you want to succeed in the long run. Think about it. If you can consistently deliver a high-quality product on time and at a good price, you're going to build trust with doctors, patients, and investors.
It's about proving that you're not just a one-hit wonder, you're a reliable part of the healthcare system. And that kind of reputation, well, I imagine it's priceless.
Absolutely. It's about going beyond just checking boxes. It's about striving for excellence. And that's what really sets those successful biotech companies apart.
Well, we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive, from the very beginning steps of understanding CMC to navigating all the complexities of launching a product. We've really explored how important this often overlooked part of drug development really is.
It's been great sharing these insights, and I hope everyone listening has come away with a better understanding of how powerful a good CMC strategy can be. Remember, it's not just about paperwork and regulations. It's about getting those life-changing therapies out into the world.
Well said. And to everyone listening, whether you're in the lab, the boardroom, or just interested in biotech, remember this. CMC is the bridge that connects amazing science with real-world impact. So keep learning, keep pushing those boundaries, and never underestimate the power of a well-executed CMC strategy. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive. And until next time, keep innovating.